Hey, it's Mike. Let's talk about Reaper. In today's episode, I'd like to take a look at a few options for making the room mics on your drum recordings sound a bit more exciting. Let's take a look. The project that I've got open is a work in progress for a new song that my bandmates and I are working on. I'll play you a section of this first verse in context, and then let's go back and take a look at the drums in isolation.
How do we escape this hell when the rain of all that strikes the ground like lies that brought us down this path again? We welcome death as our friend with a stain of red upon your canvas, slain beneath me, countless as the sands. How do we devolve to this? Death is life, it's life and death. There's nothing left, it's meaningless, it's all the same.
And for a work in progress, I think overall this is sounding pretty good. Let's take a listen to the second half of that section and hear the drums in isolation. Now, these drums were recorded here in this same room with the kit that's behind me, and sounds a little something like this. One thing that always helps a drum recording to come alive is a good room sound. I like to think that this room does have a pretty good sound. It's got 14-foot ceilings and is relatively large. It can be a little bit difficult to control vocals in this room, but I think it sounds great for drums. Some people like to use mono room mics, but I tend to use stereo mics myself. I've got a pair of Golden Age Project FC3 large diaphragm condensers on the opposite side of the room. You can definitely get some different sounds in your drum room mics depending on the height as well as the placement horizontally in the room. Let's take a quick listen to these room mics in isolation. I think that sounds pretty good, but just to give you a better idea of what these room mics truly do to a drum sound, I'll take this out of solo and play those drums back again with the room mics all the way down, and then start to blend them in. It really adds a whole lot more life and glue to the shells. The direct mics sound good on their own, but adding in that room mic, again, the best word that I can come up with to explain it is it brings the drums to life. But even with that said, I think that these drums could use a little something more to make it sound more metal. Now, if memory serves, all the big name producers like to use distressors for operations like this. And I've been wanting to get into rack-based effects a little bit more, so let's take a look on Sweetwater and see what a distressor costs these days. Oh wow, what a bargain. $1,549. I guess I could order one, but I'm wanting to use this on my stereo bus, and this is a single track only, so I'll need two of them. I think they've got a stereo version though, so let's go back and take a look. Look at that, the stereo version of the oh my gosh, $3,499. I don't know if it's worth it. Well, look at that, they've got another stereo pair. This one's $3,049. That's a little bit more affordable, but at the end of the day, I think that I just want to smash my room mics. I wonder if John from Tukan Studios has got something that I could use for this.
$3,049? You might want to try this first. Hi everybody. I didn't think I'd do that again, but here it is. The new Treasure Series 2. It's a compressor and it compresses things.
There's a lot to be said about the quality of German engineering as well as the affordability in this case, so definitely want to give a shout out to John Matthews with Tukan Studios for making this plugin. Let's add his new Treasure plugin to my room's mic bus and see what we can do. Now, some people have made comments on some recent videos about me filming in 4K and how it makes it a bit difficult for them to see things. The sad truth about that is 4K monitors are much more prevalent now, and it just is what it is. Now, I do try to do my best to zoom into things as necessary, but something that I've learned to appreciate about a lot of modern plugins is their scalability. So with this new Treasure plugin, one thing that I definitely appreciate out of the box is its scalability. I'll drag that corner down and it blows up a little bit. Now, a problem that I have found on a 4K screen is that it adds this black box to the bottom. I'm not sure what's up with that, and John may be able to fix that in some future releases, but for the time being, I'll just drag that over to the right, and hopefully this is more than big enough for most of you to see. So what I'd like to do to start is to go back and blend in these room mics to a comfortable level with this plugin disengaged, and just get them sounding okay-ish. Right about there sounds pretty good to me. That's enough to be able to hear the room and to glue the drums together, but not be overbearing. Taking a quick look at these controls, these should be very familiar to anyone who has ever either used a distressor or distressor type plugin. We've got ratios from 1 to 1 all the way up to limiting. The ratios you can activate by either clicking on the desired ratio, or you can use it just like on the physical hardware by clicking the ratio button, and the ratio will change sequentially. We've got a gain reduction meter, a bypass switch. Here we've got a detector circuit with a high-pass filter as well as a bell curve, and this will not necessarily change the sound that's going into the plugin, but it simply changes the detection circuit and alters what the plugin reacts to. Up next we've got our input, and you'll notice there's no threshold control on this, and that's because the threshold is essentially fixed, and we can use the input to drive the signal further into that threshold. We have attack and release knobs, with the higher value being slower, and of course the output to add makeup gain. There are a few hidden features on this plugin, but I'll leave that to John to explain. For the time being, let's just take a listen to the sound. Let's try a 4 to 1 ratio, and we'll set our input and attack and release to something that sounds good, and then level match and compare. Okay, so with the plugin off, I'm peaking just under -24, so I'll engage the plugin again, and we'll reduce our output to try to get our meters matched. And that's making a pretty significant difference to my ear. I'm able to get higher volumes with actual lower readings on the meter, plus with that saturation and the compression that it adds. Take a listen to the tail on that snare drum. I'll play that again without, and then I'll engage the plugin, and again, just try to focus on the tail end of the snare. We'll go on into the next section and take a listen to how it sounds in the chorus. Here's the rooms in solo. Overall, I think that that's doing a pretty good job. I like the way that it sounds and makes my room mics sound a bit more aggressive. And best of all, it saved me over $3,000. But thanks, John. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Mike. We're gonna hear a second guest soon, but first let's just talk about the hidden features. Well, actually, they're not really hidden because it's all labeled there, but there are a few things that Mike didn't explain. What I always want to have with these plugins is an input and an output meter. So you can hold the Alt key or the Option key on Mac and click on the input knob. And now you see you have an input meter and an output meter. And you can also click on the output knob for that. The second thing would be this 10:1 ratio. And this is a bit special because some of you might know that these ratios all kind of have their own circuit or characteristics, so which are essentially different compression curves. But in this 10:1 setting here, we can use the opto setting, and it's written here. So you have to go over 10 at the attack and below or to 0 to get this opto on. And now you have a completely different behavior. So don't get confused that these settings are now used. They are not used. So you don't have an attack of 10 and a release of 0, but instead you get attack and release times depending on your audio, more like optocompressors would do. And as soon as you move that here in another range, you will have this 10:1 with adjustable attack and release times. In the next demonstration by the next guest, he gets that confused. He tells that differently. So it's only opto if you take it to these settings, but he still gets great results with what he's doing. And maybe 2 or 3 more things. Mike just said that there is this blank black space below the plugin, and that's because the plugin always tries to fill the space you give it. So if there's more height than needed, it will stay black, or if there's more width than needed, it will stay black. So it always tries to fit the maximum space, as you can see. And now let's talk about 2 special ratios, and these are the ratios left and right, so 1:1 and the limiting ratio. This 1:1 ratio just turns off the compressor, so the plugin will not act as a compressor. You will have no gain reduction, but you can still use it as a saturation unit. So even with no of these LEDs on, it will give you a gentle kind of saturation. And then there's this distortion 2 and distortion 3 modes, which give you their own characteristics. And you can also use the high pass filter. And depending on the input knob, you can drive the saturation more or less, which are indicated here with these saturation LEDs. And in that limiter mode, the plugin acts in a way like a limiter, so it's very heavy compression, but you have to be careful, it's not a look-ahead limiter. Look-ahead limiters buffer a certain amount of audio and turn the levels down before the actual peak appears. While in this case, it's acting as an extreme compressor, but it still can have overs, so it will not be a limiter when you have longer attack settings. So the transits will still be left through. But don't worry, that's completely normal behavior for these units. So now let's come to our next guest. He's a great music producer, and he tells us things not only about this plugin, but a lot about serial compression, which is very interesting even if you're not using this plugin. So now I'll leave the word to him and hope you have fun with the plugins, and bye-bye.
Hi everyone, John asked me to do a small demonstration of what kind of things you can try and do with the Treasure version 2. Let's just jump into it. Today I made this example. Okay, so I was looking for some lo-fi, smooth, break, something at this tempo, and I came up with this idea. So this is the version 2. I will show you a couple of things to support whatever Mike and John also showed. So first I'm doing these 2 versions of compressing on the drums. The fantastic thing of the Treasure is that it's actually a very versatile compressor that you can use it in very different ways. So I'm stacking this one. First of all, I'm using this really aggressive way of compressing. As you can see, my drums are really strong, clicky inclined. And my kick drum doesn't have too much low end. You can even see it here in the spectral waveform. I don't have too much low end. We're going to check this, specifically this kick drum that has a longer tail. And remember that I have two compressors doing different things. The second one is limiting completely, and I'm only catching some of the picks that I'm finding on some of the snares across the drums I made. And I'm changing the tone of it. Let me show you without the treasure. I'm using the first one to take advantage a little bit of the attack. And I'm also taking advantage of the high pass filter in the sidechain detector and boosting the detector on the 6K more or less range so that it's actually listening more to the snares. And of course the high end of the kick. That way I can really control that clickiness of my sample. And with this one, with a super fast attack and release, I'm limiting completely, and I'm using two different types of distortions. Remember that distortion number 3 is on even harmonics, more of a tape style, and distortion number 2 is more of a valve style. Let me show you the effects of these pressures regarding the envelope of my kick drum. So without any compression, my kick drum is this long, and it has a lot of body and a really small attack that will probably won't cut really fast in the mix. So first I will do this one, and I will use a distortion number 3, that's the tape-like, so that I even out this low end. And now I'm respecting more or less the level of my pick. But I'm bringing this down, the body, I'm bringing it down. I'm able to bring everything up, and now whenever I limit, I'm going to limit this first pick. And I'm extending even a lot more this low end of the kick drum. I could control that with the release of my treasure. As you can see, if I make it really long, I can really control it. If I make it super fast, it's going to come back up and it's going to feel like a double low end bounce. So that's one of the things that you can actually try and do with your treasures. You can, since it's a very versatile compressor, you can try and stack it and start handling the envelope of your drums. On the other hand, if you have something like an 808, just as the one that I have right here, let me show you without this treasure. The high pass control is really important for any sidechain input, because remember, this is what the detection circuit is listening for. And since 808s usually have a ton of low end, I want to use the highest part of it, the attack itself, to actually shape the rest of the envelope. So if I turn off the high pass filter, listen to the low end. But whenever I turn it on, I'm getting a much more steady kind of compression. And remember, we have this extra information right here to know how to turn our knobs so we are closer to an up-top compression. A really fun trick that I did right here is that I'm taking advantage of both types of distortion. Remember, up top you have my kick drum, and on the second row you have my 808. So whenever I'm using the uneven harmonics for the kick drum and I'm using the even harmonics for my 808, what I'm doing is I'm separating them much better for the mix or for the tonification of the instruments themselves. Let me show you. If I match those distortion types, listen to the difference. So you can go back and play that a couple of other times, but I'm using distortion as a way of separating my instruments, and you can go crazy starting with that idea into different places. I'm going to show you more examples because I have a ton of things to show. So for this path right here, you can see the whole harmonic section of my pad itself. But I can also use my treasure just as a saturation unit, since I'm barely compressing with a very, very low ratio, and listen to this and see the harmonics. And I'm getting this extra crunchy sound, and you can see how I'm feeling a lot better this part of the spectrum. When you're starting to try and make things work, I might suggest that you see or figure out how much frequency space is everything taking. I'm going to play it once without the treasure, then with, then without, then with. And again, I'm only using this as some sort of saturation unit. And as you can see, this is matching or getting it closer or further away from other instruments. Let's jump into one last example, something that I really don't often do, but let's go into some reggaeton style. Okay, so again, I'm really stacking my treasure. So what's going on here? First, I'm using a very soft ratio. That way I can start going into the waveform and start catching the peaks. Again, I'm going to turn all of this off. So again, let's run through my idea of stacking treasures. For example, the first one has a really soft ratio. I'm going to show you first how the loop sounds without any compression of any sort, and you will see how I'm starting to reshape the whole envelope. And remember to see the differences between the peak and the RMS. Right? I'm going to first soften those transients. And the release is so fast that it's actually bringing a little bit of the reverb from the sample. Listen closely. Without it, once I get those levels a little bit better, I'm going to now add a bit of a heavier uptalk compression again, because this helps me concentrate a little bit more the tone of my loop towards the lower mids without sacrificing much of the high end of my transients. So I have these really strong transients right now, and I'm really pushing that 100 to 200 hertz range so that my kick drum really starts hitting instead of doing EQ. And bear in mind that I'm also using the detection circuit as a way of putting a little bit more attention on a certain part of the loop. At the very end, I am doing, again, some limiting to control those extra peaks that I can really just take off. Be careful without going way too fast on your attack and release times, otherwise it will distort really hard. Play around with it, move around the attack a couple of times, and that's more or less the idea of stacking treasures. You can try it because they can do so many types of compression that sometimes it might be interesting to just look for a sound with it and understand what's happening with the envelope and frequencies across time. And the last tip is that if you saw and put attention to my chain, you will see that I have these cut and return EQs, where if I move one EQ, the other one moves. So this is more or less working with the idea of what I'm feeding into the compressors. That way I'm taking something away of the attention of the compressor, even though I'm working around with the sidechain input and the filters and the frequency boosts. Thanks for inviting me, John. If you want to know more about me, be sure to check me out on It Sounds Human, and I'm happy to be here. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and thanks for listening.